Hello and welcome to the second video on this channel where we will build the F-16C by Tamiya in 1:48 scale. Before we start this build, I would like to give a quick thanks to everyone who gave such a positive feedback on the last video. I honestly did not expect it, since it being the first video of this channel. So even while this video took a little bit to come out, I was very motivated the entire time. So for this build I got some aftermarket parts, which include this ECM pod, a sniper targeting pod, both made by Eduard as you can see, exhaust nozzles made by Reskit, double-sided masks for the outside and the inside of the canopy by ASK, as well as a decal set made by Astra Decals. I selected this particular set to recreate an F-16 which took part in the Berlin Air Show back in 2024. And I did not only get to take some photos while the planes arrived, I also got some nice close-up views during the show. And you will see in the final results that I took most of my inspiration during that visit. I also got this air-to-ground ordnance set by Hasegawa because I want to display this F-16 loaded out with bombs instead of missiles. The Tamiya kit itself is pretty well known and is considered as one of the best F-16 kits in 1:48 scale, so I will just quickly go over the parts. You just saw me unpack the upper and lower part of the fuselage as well as the wings. Here we have some parts for the air intake. Some more detail parts including the elevators and the ordnance. And the clear parts. I really like that Tamiya gives you the option to have either the clear canopy as well as a grey smoked one. Finally we got the kit decals, an information sheet made by Tamiya, and the actual instructions for the kit. So, with the briefing out of the way, I would say let's get right into the build. We start off with the cockpit, which is carefully removed from the sprue, including the back wall and some of the side instrument panels. The panels get glued on the side of the cockpit tab. And the back wall just goes on the back, as you would expect. Next up I install the rudder pedals, way down and hard to see. The throttle grip, which is quite a delicate part, can be moved to whatever position you would like. Equally as delicate, but not as movable, the flight stick gets glued into place, and not movable is in the literal sense here, because during my visit the crew told me that the flight stick on the F-16 barely moves and only relies on tactile input. Up next I start work on the ejection seat. I just removed the seat pad as well as the side parts. Which are carefully joined together with Tamiya extra thin cement in the next step. And next I removed the top part of the seat from the sprue and installed it. I always thought these little horns there on the left and the right side of the seat are like breakers for the canopy, but they are actually small pitot tubes which extend after ejecting and measure the speed and the altitude. After installing the ejection handle, I quickly dry fitted the seat in the cockpit, but do not glue it on yet because it will make it hard to install the top of the fuselage. Speaking of the fuselage, I removed the lower part of the fuselage from the sprue, as well as those little brackets which will hold polycaps. Polycaps are these rubbery little parts which go in the back of the fuselage and will allow the elevators to be moved later on. I remember using these a lot when I started modeling, building tanks and armor, so I really appreciate seeing them now in an airplane kit. The front part of the lower fuselage is also where the cockpit attaches to, so I install it now to make handling during painting a little bit easier. Before I can put any paint on the cockpit though, I will need to build up the rest of the instrument panel and the glass shield. And right now I'm building up the frame for the heads-up display, which cleverly gets slotted into the main instrument panel. All of these parts will now get a quick priming coat with Ammo Mix one-shot primer black. After masking off the instrument panel and spraying the cockpit with light grey, I can continue work on the cockpit. After some touch-ups with Mr. Hobby Matte Black, I use Ammomic White to start and pick out some switches and dials and knobs. This is of course a very time-consuming and difficult process, but in my opinion much more fun and engaging than just purchasing a pre-painted photo etch part or something similar. With all the white buttons taken care of, I took out Tamiya's XF7 red and just randomly picked out some red buttons just to add some visual interest. Additionally, I took Tamiya's X25 clear green and picked out some of the screen parts on the main instrument panels. I then took Tamiya's X22 clear to go over all the screens and get a glassy finish. This unfortunately did not turn out how I imagined it to be, so I later purchased some UV curing clear resin and sort of redid the screens. I am very happy with the rest of the cockpit though, so now let's continue to work on the seat. I first painted the seat cushion with Tamiya's XF-67 NATO green. And I then picked out various details with tan, yellow and black. To round things off, I did a quick dry brushing with silver paint to give the effect of chipped paint on the seat. I then turned my attention to the wheel well of the aircraft, which starts with this lower part of the air intake, which sits right on top. I first glued in these two brackets and then add some small detail parts next to them. And then the front and back wall. I then attach the top part of the intake. I of course could have painted the inside of it white first, but it's so far down the air intake it will be hardly visible once the model is finished. This whole assembly can then be attached in the lower part of the fuselage. I then continued with the upper part of the front fuselage, and this is where I made a almost critical mistake. Because if I have read the instruction manual correctly, I would have noticed that I should have put the part which I'm removing right now on first, and the front part will sit on top of it. Luckily, I noticed just in time and was barely able to pop off the front part again and squeeze the back part in. Like I said, it's a pretty well-known kit, but I would just like to take this opportunity to say that the fitment of this kit is just awesome. The joint between the front and the back part of the upper fuselage is just along an actual panel line, so it's hardly noticeable. Next, you need to decide what kind of antenna you would like to have in front of the cockpit. You can either have it flat or with the IFF antenna. My prototype is a Block 40 aircraft, so I will put on the blank one, although I like the look of the one with the antennas more. Also, those side parts get put on, which also cleverly hide any ugly seam lines. So now it's just a deal of adding some more detail parts on the fuselage, such as the muzzle for the 20mm M61 Vulcan cannon, as well as the air brakes on the backside of the aircraft. The kit enables you to have these in the open position with some modifications, but I opted to have them closed. Up next are the lower parts of the wing, and they require you to drill some holes for the missile and bomb pylons. A quick dry fitting confirms a very nice fitment, so I can now just install the parts. The next stage of the build was the tail, which is designed in a way to be able to be popped off and on with polycaps once again, in the form of these rods that will be installed with screws on the back of the aircraft. This is a very easy task, which is done with the included screwdriver. The tail assembly itself starts with these root pieces, which just get attached to this little frame piece, which is the actual part that slides on the rods that we just installed. The rear part, which I install next, houses some of the ECM equipment of the F-16 and is also a little bit different between some of the blocks or versions of the F-16. In this case it's just a short part. The actual tail fin comprises of the main part as well as the small inset piece. which is just slotted through the root. I did a quick test fit just to confirm the removability of the tail. And while I was at it, I just quickly put on the elevators as well and just played around for a little bit. One of the most distinct features of the F-16, at least for me, is the large air intake, which always reminds me of a whale almost. And that's what we're building up right now. The lower part of the air intake also houses the gear bay for the nose landing gear. And you just have to admire how the engineers fitted all of that in this tiny space. Right now I'm just doing a quick dry fit to see what the fitment is like. I then loaded some X2 white into my airbrush and just sprayed the insides of the air intake to give it that glossy white, almost ceramic finish. Since it will be almost impossible to mask the intake once it's assembled, I put on the masking tape before gluing on the two halves. And they are then sandwiched between the two fuselage parts. Up on top there are some more inlet vanes to be attached, and I've read somewhere that these are for the air conditioning system. Finally I attached the front lip of the air intake, and this whole assembly can then be attached to the fuselage with some quite nice fitting. The next step were the flaperons, which go on the trailing edge of the wing, and Tamiya gives you the option to have them in the up position or in the down position. All you have to do is remove the according tabs and then they will just slide right in. I was then eager to get the model ready for painting, so I stuck on the nose radome, assembled the wing pylons, which also make use of the polycaps, as you can see right here. Put on the wingtip pylons and then prepared everything else for the first coat of paint. As you can see, it's the Ammo-Mig one-shot primer once again, which gives me a nice base for the colors that will follow. I really like the Ammo-Mig primer as it gives a very nice and smooth finish, and as you can see I sacrificed the clear canopy as a mask. The standard United States Air Force F-16 camouflage starts off with FS36118 medium gunship grey, which I apply in a way that creates some artificial shadows and modulation. I did the forward edge of the camouflage just behind the cockpit freehand, but spoiler warning, it was not far enough in the front, but it will be an easy fix later on. I then masked everything off and gave the bottom side the same treatment, this time around with FS36270 medium grey. Again employing that modeling technique and creating some nice shading. I then masked off the wing pylons as well as the radome and gave the model a third coat of grey, this time FS36320 Dark Compass Ghost Grey, which is just a very subtle difference from the medium grey. but just enough to also create some post-shading on the bottom. I said earlier that I wanted my F-16 to carry bombs, which I assembled by waving my hand across them, and also preparing them for paints, as well as the AIM-120s and the AIM-9 missiles. While I was waiting for that to dry, I painted the wheel well, as well as some of the landing gear parts in white. So after a little bit of back and forth with my airbrush, I managed to get all the parts painted. And then protected everything with Tamiya's TS13 Clear for the next steps, which are the decals. Like I said, I'm going to recreate the exact F-16 which I saw at the airshow, which is part of the 555th Fighter Squadron, also known as the Triple Nickel, out of Aviano Air Base in Italy. The set by Astra Decals offers all the numbers, so you can create any F-16 you want. One thing that I'm very grateful for is that the F-16 does not have a ton of stencils, so the whole decaling process was rather quick compared to other aircraft. And the decals also handled quite nicely. They were a little bit thin, so they required some extra care. But after a little bit of convincing with decal softener, they set in place nicely. One thing that I also really like about the F-16 are the colorful fin flashes. In the case of the Triple Nickel, it's a very nice green. Just below that is where the coat of arms for the European wing of the United States Air Force goes. And below that the tail coat, in this case Alpha Victor for Aviano Air Base, one of the more obvious ones. After giving everything another clear coat, I started the weathering process, which in this case just comprised of the Tamiya Panaline accent color, which helps to give a little bit more contrast to the otherwise very dull surface of the aircraft. It also brings out the panel lines a little bit more, which nicely complements the painting technique. It looks a little bit chaotic at first, but after some handling with White Spirit, it blends in very nicely. Here I try to capture the difference between the left side, which I just did, and the right side, which is still awaiting its treatment. After doing the bottom side, including the wheel wells, I could finally start the final assembly, which starts off with the landing gear, which is usually one of the more fragile parts, but in this case it was quite a nice job. Up next are these fins on the back of the aircraft. And then the weapons pylons. To me, this final assembly stage is always one of the more satisfying stages of the model, because you can nicely see all your work coming together. I then put on the 4 GBU-12 bombs, as well as the wheels, and could then set up the model on its own legs for the first time. Also, one of the more satisfying parts is removing the canopy masks. I also came across these remove before flight tags made by Eduard. The ones on the screen are for 1/48 scale and 1/72 scale. But if you mix and use both of them on one model, it enhances the realism of the model by a great length, in my opinion. I just drilled a hole and tried to make a sort of safety pin, which will get put next to the targeting pod. And to enhance the realism of the model even further, I designed and 3D printed these covers for the AOA sensors, as well as the AIM-9 Seeker covers. After a splash of paint, they can be just put on top of the missiles, as well as on the nose of the aircraft. The very last step was installing the ECM pod on the bottom of the aircraft, and then I called it a day. So after every build comes the cleanup of the workbench, and while I do that, you can enjoy the final images of this model. I'm personally very happy with how this build turned out. For me it was quite fun to recreate an exact prototype, especially because I got to take some nice close-up images and also now have like a little personal connection to the build. So that was it, let me know what you think in the comments and see you on the next video.